Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Heil, and I'd like to welcome you to Protected Tomorrows. Our webinar today is titled The ABLE Act, Ready to Enable Savings for Life. And now I'd like to introduce the president and founder of Protected Tomorrows, Marianne Ellert.
Hello, everyone, again, and I hope I've seen you in some other sessions, but I'm happy to see you today. And the ABLE Act is going to be a fun session. It's got a lot of detail in it, but I think what you'll learn is what it is, one, two, what are the pitfalls? How does it fit with special needs trusts? And how do you use it, right? So it's very confusing now. The more tools we get, the more confusing it is. I always relate it because all of these things we talk about in these classes are our tools, right? They're the people and all the components of things. And the more tools you have in your toolbox, when you open the toolbox, you're like, which tool do I use? And it's easy when there was only a hammer and a screwdriver. But all of a sudden you have automated things and you have all these other tools that are fancy smancy stuff. And you're like, I don't know which one to use first. So we're going to help you learn the right tool for the right job. And I think this will be a great class for people to have a good understanding of what we're talking about. So we have covered lots of things. We've already covered an overview. We've talked about benefits. We've talked about legal. How does this fit in to the whole big planning of things? And so where did this ABLE Act come from? Well, I think it's a great tool. It came about because the whole disability community recognized that having $2,000 in your name is not enough for anybody, right, to have access to. But yet that rule still exists. So if we talk about, in order to get benefits, what can a person have? Again, it's a house, a car, a prepaid funeral, $2,000, and the ABLE account. And we never could say the ABLE account before. We've always had that $2,000 limitation. So this ABLE Act allowed us to create accounts for our child that were tax advantaged, that were able to be used similar to a college savings plan, which is, it's actually was an amendment to Section 529 of the IRS code, which allowed us to save for a person tax-free as long as it is used for the proper services and benefits for this person. And so we want to make sure we understand how those rules apply. And so let's get started. It came about because it recognized that there are costs for a person with a disability, and the $2,000 just didn't cut it, right? But when it was being passed, there was a lot of discussion. There were people who recognized how it might be used. There was attorneys who were fearful that it would be used, and people would think it had replaced a special needs trust, which it has not. There were financial advisors, some of them like me, thinking, oh my gosh, it's just going to be a way for people to think that they can make commissions on a sale to somebody. Thank goodness it's not sold that way at all. They're really regulated just like the 529s are, except the 529s have a much broader way that they can be sold by brokers. The ABLE accounts are very strictly and specifically sold through states, and we'll talk about how those are set up. So these are the basics. I'm going to cover each one of these. They're tax-free savings. It can be used for approved expenses. The person with the disability must have had the disability before the age of 26, prior to 26. One ABLE account per person with a disability. The contribution amount is limited per year, and the amount you could put in is capped in total. So let's talk about each one. Tax-free. Yep, it's tax-free. It's tax-free savings. Sounds good. I don't think that's why I do it. I don't think that's the real big benefit. It's nice. And if you're going to use it for funding to the max, just like college savings, it sounds good. But I would say most people aren't thinking about that at all in many capacities. So it's only tax-free, but I want you to understand the rules. It's tax-free like the college 529. The college savings account, it's tax-free as long as you use it for college, you use it for education, right? Use it for something else, there's going to be penalties. That's how this works. You put money into it, it grows tax-free. But when it comes out, it's tax-free because you're taking it out for a legitimate purpose. And if you don't use it for that, the income will be taxed and there'll be a 10% penalty on that growth. It used to, when it first came out, it was not a checking or savings account specifically or an investment account specifically. It happens to be all of those, most of them. So that's the first thing to know. It's tax-free savings and it's very flexible, and the different accounts have different capacities of how they do it. It's just not just one thing. Used for approved expenses only. What does that mean? Very broad. It's much broader than even the special needs trust. So it can be for education, it can be housing, it can be transportation, a job related, assistive technology, personal support services, very broad. Sometimes when I ask the person who runs the Illinois ABLE, family will email me and say, can I use it for this? Can I use it for that? Because it's supposed to be supplemental over and above what the government benefits pay for, right? If you think about it that way. But it can pay for things that the special needs trust cannot. So JJ Hanley, who runs the Illinois plan currently, if I ask her, she'll say, think about it this way. Is it in the best interest? And does it make their life better for the person with special needs? Now, it's not. So if taking my sister on a vacation with me, it has to be for me if I'm the disabled person. It can't be for my sister, right? So if they're going on vacation with the sister pays their way, and the ABLE account pays the person with a disability, uses the funds for themselves, not for somebody else. So that's kind of the filter, if you can understand that. Okay. The thing that that the ABLE can pay, which is interesting, is rent. So a special needs trust is not supposed to pay basic support. It can own a home, but it can't pay rent. All right. This account can. So I'll give you a very specific example of an approved expense. It was a really positive thing. So my son has a disability. He's living in housing. He gets benefits, and his benefit check doesn't cover the amount he has to pay for his housing. So if he paid his rent with his check, he wouldn't have enough to live. And so, but that was the housing that was available to him. So if I was ever to write a check to pay for part of his rent, that would reduce his benefits because he'd be getting assistance. But I'm able to take money and put it into his ABLE, and he can use that money to subsidize his rent. So there's two tools that the ABLE account enables us to have a better life for a child and be legitimate. So we don't have to worry about that doing something that will hurt their benefits. And we're going to talk about specific examples. Okay, what does the onset of a disability prior to age 26 mean? Well, how do we prove that? Well, the person has to be entitled because of their disability. How do we prove they have the disability? They're getting SSI, they're getting SSDI, they're on the compassionate allowance list, or they self-certify, which says when they do the application, they say, yep, I'm disabled. Now, what's the risk of saying you're self-certified and you're not? It's when that you're taking money out, and just like if you're using college 529 money and you don't use it for college, how do they know? You get audited and they check it. So I don't see anybody using this account who shouldn't up to this point. Doesn't mean somebody won't at some point, but people have been pretty diligent about this. That age 26 limiting factor might get changed at some point. I mean, there's been conversation about extending that age, but right now it had an age limit because they didn't want this to be used for people going into nursing homes and being used in the senior capacity to enable themselves to be eligible for Medicaid for nursing homes. So this age made sense to some degree. All right. Some other basics here, it's really important to understand. One ABLE account per qualified person. Qualified person meaning the person with a disability who's qualified to have this. So grandma can't set one up for my son, and I couldn't set one up for my son. He can only have one account. So once I set one up, that's the limit. Okay, he cannot have two. Okay. The maximum that can go into an account per year is maxed at the federal gifting amount, which is currently $15,000. So when I gift, I can give $15,000 to anybody on the planet. Okay. This number, this $15,000, is the limit that can be put into an ABLE account per year. So if I put $10,000 in, my sister wanted to fund it too. She can put $5,000 in. She cannot put 15, and I can't put 15. We each can't. 15 is the maximum going into that account per year. Okay. Anything else would have to come out. The maximum amount that can be in the account overall is capped by the state. So these programs are set by state. So let's talk about that for a minute. The federal government passed the law. And then each state, if they wanted to have one, they had to create their plan. And some states have them Some states don't. So if I look at states, I'll say, okay, the first state that had one was Ohio. There was a battle who's going to be first, right? Ohio was first. Lots of states have them. Florida has one, but it can only use by Florida residents. That's it. So if I wanted to use the Florida one, I could not if the person with a disability didn't live there. Illinois is in a consortium of other states. But any state, anybody in any state can use Illinois, and Wisconsin doesn't have one. So you got to know where you live. Does your state have one? And what's the difference? So there's places that you can go online to compare the programs. And so you say, which one's best for me? So I live in Illinois, and the Illinois plan allows me, when I put money in for my son, I get a tax credit. So that works for me. And the investments are really good inside of it. Now, if I decided the investments inside of a particular plan weren't as good and I want to use another one, and I might want to give up my deduction, my tax credit, I might do that. If I said, if I lived in a state that didn't have one, I lived in Wisconsin, they don't have one, I couldn't use Florida's, but I could use Ohio's or Illinois, because they both allow people from other states. So it's understanding about which plan you might want to use and how do they compare. Okay, who can open an ABLE account? The account owner. So who owns the account? The person with the disability who is being out for, the beneficiary, owns it. But do they control it? Who owns it is the eligible person who's not under guardianship. Okay, so if a person has a guardian, there needs to be, so this is the concept of the guardianship. If you become a guardian of the money for someone, you are saying that that person doesn't have authority to manage money. How can they be the person who's authorized to run this account for themselves? So if somebody has and there's an authorized person on the account, it can be the parent or guardian of that person if they're a minor, and it can be the parent or guardian of a person who has proof, as long as that person has proof that they're guardianship, right? So they're going to have to either send in their guardianship paperwork, a birth certificate, power of attorney. You need to send some proof on that you are the parent of a minor or the guardian of an adult person. Okay, so many people with disabilities can't do that, but some can. Okay, so the owner could be someone who has the disability themselves. That doesn't mean it counts against them. So what's the great thing about this account is that, remember we said a person with SSI or Medicaid can have a house, a car, they drive, a prepaid funeral, $2,000, and an ABLE account. So they can have an ABLE account that's funded over the years and have money inside of it, significant funds for themselves. Okay. So what is this thing? People say, well, what is it? Well, it's an investment account. It's run by the state. So each state has their investments. We're going to talk about an example of one. It's a tool in the toolbox, as I said. You see the toolbox, we got to use the right tool for the right job. It's very flexible. It's very easy to use. The states, you go onto the state programs, you don't go to a bank. There's usually a bank that administers it, but you can't go to the bank to do that. You're going to go online to open your ABLE account. Okay, very simple. It's also a learning tool. So sometimes we will do a program for young adults with disabilities, and we want to teach them how to use it. They might have their rep payee account, that there's somebody's a rep payee for them, but they might have an ABLE account too. And we're going to teach them about how the ABLE account is used, especially if they don't have a guardian, right? And teach them how this fits in with their other accounts. So it's a great way to teach about money. It makes sense in certain situations, and it's a way to get in trouble if you don't know how to use it. Okay, clear. All right. It is not for everyone. It's not a 529. It doesn't replace a special needs trust, and it doesn't allow maximum funding. What does that all mean? So when I'm planning for someone and I figure out, well, they're going to need X amount for the rest of their life, I could never put enough in this ABLE account to make it enough for the rest of their life. And typically, because of some other reasons, I may not fund it to the max. I might have the special needs trust with the big money and the ABLE account being the daily using account. So they fit together. Okay, we'll talk about how important that is. So here's a little chart. People say, I'm so confused. So I hope this helps. So there's 4 ways we can have money, right? We can have the money in the person's name or their rep payee account. They can have a third-party special needs trust, which we talked about legal in another class. So if you need more training on that, go back and launch that. There's also a first-party special needs trust. Remember, the third-party trust is the trust that is money funded by other people. And the first party trust is a trust that we set up when somebody goofs up and they have their own money, and we put it in a first party trust and has a payback on it at government at the death of the person, and the ABLE account. So how much can go into each one? In the individual's own name, they can have $2,000 and exempt assets, right? So that's the max they can have in their own name of all accounts. So if they have savings bonds and they have a bank account, the total of them can't be over 2,000. A third-party trust can have unlimited money. A first-party trust can have an unlimited amount of money. The ABLE account, so let me talk about I'm going to use the Illinois account as an example. The Illinois ABLE, the maximum you can have it in is $450,000. That's a state regulation. That's tied to the same amount because it's at 529 regulations and the IRS code. So in Illinois, Illinois' 529 allows up to 450,000. So the Illinois ABLE does too. However, why do I have 100,000 there? Now I'm asking about how much you can have in that account and still keep your SSI. And it's 100,000. So we're going to talk about that. So just recognize ABLE accounts, if it's over 100,000, the SSI gets suspended, and it's important nuance to understand. That 100,000 limit applies only to SSI, not to Medicaid, just SSI. So when a person has SSI, we care. When an adult gets older and they either get their own work record and get out of the SSI system, or aren't in the SSI system because they're on their parents' record getting that DAC benefit. If you watch the benefit class, we talked about DAC being the benefit a person gets on their parents' record when the parents retire or die. And once the child gets out of SSI and gets into their own SSDI because they've had some work record, or they get into the DAC system, this $100,000 limit doesn't apply anymore because they're not an SSI. Okay, so it's only SSI that gets suspended. How much can you put in these accounts? In their own name, it's not applicable. We have to keep it down below the 2. There is no maximum contributions on the special needs trusts, and the ABLE accounts have a limit of the federal gifting amount, which right now is $15,000. What can you spend it for? So the money in their name can be spent for anything, right? It's their money. The third-party trust, it has to be for the benefit of the beneficiary. It has to be for their benefit. And the first-party trust has to be for the sole benefit. So there are some more limitations on the first-party trust because it's a little more regulated, and because there's going to be you can't just be spending it willy-nilly and then spend it all and not have any payback to the state. So there's a little more limitations. The ABLE Act says it must be qualified disability related. That was very confusing when these came out, but most of the time when people can't come up with too many instances, unless the money is being used for somebody else, where there's a limitation. So just be aware and conscious of that disability related in the best interest of the person rule. And money in the person's name is taxed. Person in the third party trust could be taxed to the individual or to the trust if it's a standalone trust that has its own tax ID. The first party trust is taxed it has the social security number of the person with the disability, so it's taxed to them. And the ABLE account has no tax unless the money was used improperly, and then could be taxed and have a penalty, as we said. We talked about the contribution limits and reporting on your own money. You might have to report how you're using some of your SSI money. Most of the time when the child's still living at home, there's not that reporting required anymore in some states. The third party trust, there really isn't a lot of reporting, but the first party trust there is. And upon the death of the child, you will be asked to account for the money so that you can make clear that it was used properly. And the ABLE account, you'll see me talking at the end about it's a really important, I think, to track how it's used. So creating a little system of saying, what did I put in, what did I take out, in case you're ever audited, you have a good track record. Okay. It's another way to look at this. There's all these tools. When do we use them? Okay. So what goes into what account? So when I'm talking about where the money comes from, the third party trust is for other people's money, parents' money, other people's money, and their money can also go into the ABLE. The person with the disability's money can go into the first party trust and can also go into the ABLE. So the ABLE can take anybody's money, even the person with a disability, and it often does. You'll see that. There's a limit to funding to the ABLE, and the others do not have limits. The ABLE is controlled by the authorized individual or the person with a disability, but special needs trust, the person with the disability never controls it. Okay, there's another trustee. They cannot be the trustee on a special needs trust. So the ABLE is kind of neat in that the person with a disability could be the person who controls it if they don't have a guardian. So now they've got access to money. They still have accounting that they have to do on it, but the first party trust and the third party trust can never be controlled by the person with a disability. Sometimes the third party and first party trusts aren't so efficient for small accounts. If you just wanted to have a couple $1,000s set aside for something, it's not very efficient to open up a trust account sometimes for that. The ABLE account is just an account set up with the state. It's really simple. It's got a checking account. You can have a savings account. Some of them have investments. Some of them have debit cards. There's lots of uses. Okay, very, very practical. And then again, the trusts are not tax-free and the ABLE account is. So you see the differences of what's going in and how they're being used is important to understand. So since this is an online class, you can come back to this when you're having a question and go, what did she say about that? Right? You could print the slide out for yourself. Okay, so what are the limitations of the ABLE that you need to know? One, SSI suspended if the account exceeds $100,000, all right? There's a limitation on that. So if the account hits 100,001, we have SSI suspended, not canceled, suspended. And so if the account goes back below 100,000, SSI goes back into play. Pay attention. Now, if you haven't opened one up or you just opened one up, they've only been around for a couple of years. If you can only put $15,000, the markets are good. And if you're invested in the markets, that's nice, but you don't have 100,000 in the account yet. So if you're on SSI, you got to pay attention. The other downside is this payback. It's like a first party trust, a little different. So if I have a first party trust, that trust where we put the child inherited some money and we put it in this first party trust so they keep their benefits, right? Medicaid payback on a first party trust will go back to birth, the date of birth. So if the person has Medicaid that they're using through their entire life, and they set up here's their lifetime, and the first party trust gets up here, the payback on Medicaid can go all the way back to their birth. The payback on the ABLE accounts goes back to the date of the account set up. So if the child's getting Medicaid, and they keep getting it, but the ABLE is set up right here, the payback will start as at the date that the account was set up. Little difference on the payback. But be aware, there's a payback. So if you say, well, I'm going to fund this account and I'm going to keep saving it to the whole 450,000, and they're passed out of SSI, they're now getting SSDI, but they've been getting Medicaid for a lot of expenses. You may say the big money goes in the special needs trust and the working money goes in the ABLE. Okay, each person is going to look at it differently. So I want to relate this. So I said I want to give you the basic concepts. So now you know the basic rules, right? So let's talk about what are the old rules and what do we have to use? And what are the new rules? What are the old rules and old tools, and what are the new rules and new tools? So we've always had this problem with benefits. Remember the benefit circle if you watch the benefit class. Those benefits on the bottom, the SSI and Medicaid, income and asset limitations. The SSDI and Medicare didn't have an asset limitation, but the SSI and Medicaid, which is a really important program because Medicaid's funding job coaching and residential and services, and those are the big dollars, right? And healthcare. So they're funding the big dollars, and we couldn't have much money in our family member's name, and so we had no place to put it. We had to either spend it or be out of compliance, right? Or we'd have a payback, or we'd have a spend down, or whatever we have. So, and the other old tool was the special needs trust. So we had benefits with all kinds of limitations and never could have more than $2,000. And then we had the special needs trust, right? And the third party and the first party. We had those tools. So all of a sudden, we have some old rules, but a new tool. So the SSI limitation, and here I'm showing you Illinois ABLE, that there's just many states have ABLEs. I just happen to be in Illinois, so I'm going to refer to that one sometimes. When I have too much money in my child's name and I can only have $2,000, what can I do if they get a gift? If somebody wants to give them a gift, I can't put it in their account, but it can go in the ABLE. So grandma wants to give them $500, give each of their grandchildren $500 for their birthday. this child doesn't have to be left out. Their $500 can go in their ABLE account as long as it's within that $15,000 for the year, right? What if my child's got their account's getting too big and they already have 1,800 and then they get some payment from the government, like happened last year through the pandemic. They had time to spend that money, but if you want to keep it really simple, take the overage and put it in the ABLE, right? So anytime their account gets close to 2,000, you kind of have okay, anytime it gets over 500, transfer the extra over to the ABLE. Great, great tool. So how does the ABLE account help? Let's just be very specific. It helps keep countable funds below $2,000 because ABLE's not countable. So anytime the funding gets too high, it makes life so simple. You just say, I'm going to have a limit. This is a limit I'm going to set on the account. You can even on a bank account, anytime they say when the account gets to a certain point, send me a warning. And you say, okay, I got to transfer some money over to the ABLE. And you can connect the accounts, the ABLE account and the bank account together so you can do a transfer, okay? It encourages family members to help. So it used to be, Grandma, you can't help this child, right? If Grandma's capable and she wants to do gifting and she can gift money to all her grandchildren, now she can help this child too. The money can go into the ABLE. It also teaches our children about money. So we run classes for individuals with disabilities, teaching them, what's a budget and what's the ABLE and what can they use it for? And sometimes they get debit cards and how do they use that, right? So it's great tool. It helps. How can we build savings? Okay, how to do that? So where should you save if you're going to save? Well, there's different kinds of spending and there's different kinds of savings, all right? So how should you use the ABLE? How much is for short term, how much is for midterm, and how much is for long term? So there's different ways to save. There's different places to put money. How much money that we're going to use for our child is going to be the money they're going to use on a daily basis. How much money is going to be for their long-term future, and how much is in the midterm. It's the same as what we do, right? For ourselves, we say, okay, I have to have an emergency fund in case, I need extra medical attention. I need to save for a car. I want to save for my vacation. Short-term spending is very short. Midterm spending might be something in the 3 to 5 years, and long-term spending is past 5 years, right? You also have to know when you're setting these up. If you're the authorized individual helping them, it's important to know how you think about money. It's important for us all to do this. Am I going to be, and is your child a spender? How much, would you put on a debit card for them? Are they a spender? Are you a spender? Are you a saver? Are you a worrier? So should you be in these investments inside of the ABLE account if you're going to worry about the stock market going up and down? If it's money for the long haul, don't worry about it. Put it away, get some growth. If it's money for midterm, you got to say, how fast do I need it? Because if it's in some investments and the market's going to crash 2008 and 2009, where the market was down for 2 years, you want the long-term money that's invested that could go down, be the longer-term money. So you don't have to be the worrier. But if you're a real worrier, you got to be really pretty conservative. Are you a risk taker? You're saying, okay, I'm going to pick those investments inside of that thing that are 90% stock. Well, it should be for a longer term, right? Or are you a procrastinator? You should have set this up. How many of you said, I want to learn about the ABLE. I know I should be setting it up, but you haven't done it yet. Know this about yourself. This is not a coward count to do. It's just you have to do it, right? So if you're a procrastinator, your homework should be emailing me saying, I commit to open an ABLE account by July 31st. Okay. Each of them has different investment choices. You need to learn these, right? So some of them have specific funds you have to pick. Some of them have portfolios and you get really pretty significant, good portfolios at low cost. Which one you're going to pick might help you decide which one you're going to use, right? So if it's short-term money, you might put it in the conservative pot. And if it's money for when your child is going to be 35 or 40 years old, or it's when you're gone, you might pick the aggressive investment. But the fee, look at the fees, they're really low, right? A lot of times when you're a professional money manager, you're charging anywhere from 0.5% to 1.5%, depending upon how you manage the money. And these are less than 0.5%. So a lot of the portfolios have had good investments inside of them. It's something you should be thinking about. Okay, so let's talk about real use. Okay, you want to know, you know the rules. Everybody know the rules. If you don't understand them, watch this again. Okay, but let's talk about real use life of this account. First of all, remember when you're using it, remember the rules. The maximum you can put in is 15,000. It started at 14, it got increased. Another use, you set up when your child was young a college savings account at 529, and now they're not going to college. And if you take it out, there's going to be penalties, right? There's going to be, you don't use it for college, you're going to have to pay tax on the growth. You can roll over 529s into an ABLE account. So grandma set up a college savings account for all her grandchildren. This child's not going to be going to any kind of college, even a trade school, the 529 can be used for. People say, should I keep it there? Well, 529 accounts are typically not owned by your child, they're the beneficiary. So it doesn't hurt them. 529 does not hurt your child for their benefits because a parent or grandparent owns it, right? But unless somehow your child became the owner. So you can leave at 529 if you're not sure your child's going to be going to some kind of an education program. But if they are not, then you can roll it over to the ABLE. Now, be careful because you can roll over 15,000 a year. Why? Why is it 15,000? Because that's the limit that you can put. So if you roll money from the ABLE, let's say you decide I got this ABLE, I roll a 529 that's got 20,000. I'm going to roll 15 into the ABLE. That's it for the ABLE for the year. Because if grandma wants to put some money in, she can't. So you kind of look at the whole picture and say, I've got this 529. Well, maybe I'm going to think people are going to put something in it. Maybe I'm going to roll 5,000 a year from the ABLE, from the 529 over to the ABLE. Okay. Another thing that's pretty new, so new that I kind of tell people to be wary, but that's not you can't do it, but how are you going to track it? So Social Security has said they allow you now to directly deposit your SSI and SSDI checks directly to the ABLE. So you got to kind of think, how much is that check? And you want to make sure it's not going to be over the 15,000 that's going in there. And it's also going to limit what can go into the account. So you take that all into account. But sometimes people just have a hard time keeping their child's account below that amount. So they just have it directly deposited to the ABLE account. So something you can do. But when you have to account from an SSI perspective, how you use the money, if you have to, then you need to make sure you're watching that. You still have to account for it, even though you moved it. There's more legislation to say, not only can the 15,000, this is really good if your child can work. And I know I'm talking to a lot of audiences when I do these, but if the child has income of any kind from work, they're also allowed to, and it's based on state, but they're also allowed to contribute 12,000 and something from their work. So if they're making some money and they're making 200 a month, 200 a month of their money could also be rolled over to this account. So now if they had the max, it's about 15,000 from other people or them and other people, 15, and then another 12, but it has to come specifically from their work. So we're talking about, it could be about 27,000 going in a year if the child has a maximum earnings and the 15,000 from other people. Okay. All 27 could come from the child, 12 of their work and 15 from another account. It could all come from work if it needed to be, but it'd be 27,000 total for the child. Okay. So what are your dangers about using this? One, not understanding the rules. Grandma trying to put money in, other people. So being clear with the family. Remember, we talk about communication, lack of understanding how to use it, funding it beyond what you can, losing SSI, and payable to death. So dangers, just be aware. What's some practical uses? Putting money in, practical uses. Third party. So third party money is other people's money. How can it be used? Grandma wants to give money. Okay. Grandma wants to give a small amount. I'd put it in the ABLE. Grandma wants to write a really big check. I'd put it in the third party special needs trust. Or maybe I'd put 10 in the ABLE and the rest of the money grandma wants. Some grandmas have to get rid of their money, want a gift during their lifetime. Sometimes people want to see their children benefit during their lifetime and not do it at death. Inheritances, a small amount could go to the ABLE and the rest could go to third-party trust. The problem is with an inheritance, to plan it to go to the ABLE is a problem because you don't know when you're going to die and you don't know how much is put in there, right? But there are families who have very little and they can't afford a third-party special needs trust, and maybe they have just so much little money, they could just say, when I pass away, what I have goes to the ABLE. And it might have to be done over a couple of years, but that's a use. The other thing that's important to know is that if I'm funding my son to help him with his rent, I'm going into the ABLE and he uses the ABLE to help pay his rent. So that works as long as I'm competent and alive, right? So how do I plan for that? Because if I set up a third-party trust for my son, and the third-party trust can't pay rent, and I'm not around anymore to do it, how do I make sure that he has enough to live on? The third-party trust could pay other things, but that means he still has to use the incoming money on a regular basis of his own, and it's just not enough to pay rent. So I can have my attorney modify the special needs trust, if it's modifiable, to say, I want my trustees to have the right to fund the ABLE on an annual basis. I think that's a really good planning technique. And I would say, if you have a special needs trust, I would go check it to make sure it does allow funding to the special needs trust. So the third-party trust could put money in the ABLE, and now the child has money every year that they need. I could have my third-party trust put some money that I'm putting typically while I'm alive. It can replace me and fund that trust for him. Really great use. What about first-party money? How do we use these? So my son gets money as an inheritance. Somebody didn't leave it to his third-party trust. Once he gets it, I can't put it in the third-party trust. If it's a small amount, before it was always a problem. Okay, he got this money and I put him over the limit. I can now take that amount as long as the ABLE hasn't gotten too much money that year. I can put it in the ABLE. If it's a lot of money, I would have to go and use a first-party special needs trust. Litigation. So there's a private settlement of some type, personal injury. If it's a small settlement, it can go to the ABLE. If it's a big settlement, it can go to the first-party trust. Okay. You earn too much. The child is earning money. They earn too much. And so it goes into their account, it cuts them off of benefits. They can take their earnings and put it into the ABLE. They could put their earnings into a first-party trust too, but you typically wouldn't use a trust for a small amount again, right? So the ABLE is really good for the small money. That's why I have the dollar sign of $1 sign versus 2 versus 3. And then the direct deposit of SSI would go into the ABLE account. You typically would not put that to a first-party trust. Very, very useful tools. Okay. So a couple other things to think about as we wrap up. What are practical expenditures coming out? So before we talked about getting money in, how do we take money out? So you have a life care plan built for your child. I recommend that. Just like you have a budget and you have a retirement plan, we kind of do that for your child and say, what are the annual needs? The ABLE could spend what's going to be needed on a regular, remember, short-term, transportation, education, a job coach, personal support services, rent, recreation, short-term things that the child's going to need. They're going to, somebody's going to help pay a job coach for them. They need some rent money. They have recreational activities. They stay involved in Special Olympics, but need transportation. Those kind of things are great for the ABLE account. All right. What gets funded out of the special needs trust? I'm trying to help you. How do you fund each one? So future funding. So the ABLE account is helping funding short-term transportation, but I got to think about the transportation for the whole future. Now remember, if I fund a bunch of money in the special needs trust, it can always come back to the ABLE account on some kind of basis when it's needed for the short term. And then here we're talking about the future funding. Maybe they need some education, employment support. Maybe that special needs trust is going to help them buy a house because the trust can own a property. Maybe this third-party trust can pay for traveling companions. The ABLE account is going to fund their travel. The third-party trust can say they need a traveling companion. They can't go without them, right? And then they also future funding of the ABLE, as we said. So there's very distinct, when you think about it, you say, what's going to pay for the bills now? What's the ABLE going to do? And then what's the third-party trust going to do? It's how to think about it. Other uses that can be paid from the ABLE are advocacy services, guardianship fees, legal fees, administrative expenses. Now, many times we say the trust should not be paying guardianship fees because typically they would not be using those funds for that. They could, but mostly the ABLE accounts are very effective for the administrative needs as well. Okay, so you're ready to do it. You heard me talk about all this stuff and you say, I want to do this. So then you're going to say, okay, does my state have a plan? And if I'm eligible, you can use it if you're eligible. Okay. My state doesn't have a plan. Where can I find a state that is open and doesn't restrict outside users? So you decide which state you're going to use. And then is there a cost? Yes. Usually, if you're going into your own state, the cost might be less than being a non-resident. Look at the investments inside of them. What are the costs inside those investments? You can go to, there's a couple of sites that you can go online and you want to compare them. Go online to first look at your own state, see what they work, because it's usually advantageous. But I have people in other states where the plan's not as great as Illinois, and so we'll open up an Illinois account for people. And then track your expenses, right? They can ask. An IRS can come back and say, what'd you spend that money for? It can be audited. So I just say 2 things you should do once you open it. It says use it. Is track what you're spending, track what's coming in, track what's going out. Okay. And then secondly, if you're vesting, manage it. Because if you're putting it in growth, then all of a sudden you realize that you got too much in that portfolio because it's growing. So you pick a portfolio that is a certain size and you feel like, well, that's more risk than I can tolerate. You can change your investment choices. Okay. Also track it. What works for you? When you do this tracking, I'm trying to get some practical stuff. So we talked about the rules. We talked about how to use it. Now, how do you implement it, right? So if you want to track it, create a binder or use this tool like Mint or Quicken, people who do budgeting for themselves, set up categories. So what's travel, what's rent, put up some categories. If you want to keep receipts, don't keep the hard copy receipts, scan them, create a little file and scan them. Why? Because if you ever got audited and you have receipts and nobody can read the receipts, I always tell this for people who are getting SSI too. If you want to keep how you spent money, scan the receipts because the scan will be readable and receipts fade. So watch for tools that track. There's lots of tools that you might be able to use. Okay. So a couple of things. You have an ABLE account ready. What do? Check your special needs trust. These are reminder to-dos. So instead of making you come up with things, I'm going to give you a few ideas of things you could do. Check your special needs trust. Make sure it allows you to fund the ABLE. Create a tracking binder of something or a system. Build a life care plan. Build the care plan and start saying, okay, how much should go into each of those accounts and figure out where that's going to happen. Pull this all together and then manage it going forward. Those are the steps that are really important in having an ABLE account. The other thing I'll leave you with is everything's always changing about this. So we will try to offer updates on an ongoing basis. If you're not signed up for our newsletter, you can sign up for the newsletter and we have articles about it. Be proactive. Don't let this override you. Some of the rules are continuing to be clarified. When it first came out, it was new. Nobody knew how to use it. We're getting really good at understanding how to be used. It's like so we're coming down with fine tuning of our sessions. And then stay tuned for new information being offered on a regular basis. So that is the ABLE account. I hope that was helpful. Again, if you have of every class I've had, I've said, tell me what you're going to do. You get your guilt card out. If you have questions, save them for a Q&A session that we'll have in the future. Email me what you're going to do. Are you going to go on and check which account to use? Are you going to look at your account? Are you look at your special needs? Just what's your first step in making this an effective class for you? Okay. Thank you very much for listening to ABLE. And I hope this enables the future of your child. Thank you very much. Have a great day.